Hello everybody, it's Mark with Original Human Geek here, bringing you part 3 and the finale of the Halo Reach datapads lore story. In the last episode, which is part 2 obviously, we went over how the Assembly, or just the Rebel Mind, kind of inadvertently started the Human Covenant War by risking everything by initiating contact with an alien species, which kind of tells us how the Minds are willing to play God in that fashion. We're going to finish up this with datapads 13 through 20, so without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get started. Starting with datapad 13, the Discoverer here raises an interesting point. If the Minds are looking out for the best interests of their creators, then why don't they consult their creators at all? The Assembly and the actions of its members have had a significant impact on humanity, not least forcing first contact between humanity and the Covenant, the consequences of which need no explanation here. It raises serious concerns about the Assembly. When these artificial beings act together in a group and do so over a long period of time, easily outlasting the lifespan of a single mind, equal or less than 7 years, is it possible for this group to be affected by a kind of collected rampancy? One of the telltale signs of rampancy is an AI believing itself to be better, superior than its creators, and to think of them as lesser beings as a result. With the Assembly's self-appointed role as humanity's guardians and making decisions on our behalf due to lack of trust, the Discoverer essentially asks, is the Assembly of Minds running rampant? It just might be. The Assembly minority here talking about non-trivial sacrifices that will be needed in order for the Assembly to come up with and act upon solutions to their current problem. The non-trivial sacrifices are human lives, and to rephrase the minority's statement, they need to surrender an undisclosed but large amount of people to Covenant to buy the Assembly time. They seem to be taking the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few approach here. But what we're seeing here is a secret group of AI determining who lives or who dies in a war they most likely started. Secondary to their human sacrifices, the Assembly's need to remain hidden, even during this time of war, from their creators. They do not want to risk discovery, and this factors strongly into their dealings, although they do make room for an estimate minimum amount of humans needed to ensure the human race can survive if the worst was to happen, but that fact is not much relief here. The Minds are taking grave risks to furnish a safety net for themselves. The survival of the Minds is just as important as humanity's survival. We move on to the next datapad. The Discoverer seems to be rambling and almost incoherent here. This entry is set 4 years into the Human Covenant War, and the situation is clearly dire for humanity, with 8 colony worlds that have fallen with over 62 million casualties. What is interesting to note is the estimated times for recovery for some of the lost colonies between 110 to 300 year window. This suggests the damage caused by the Covenant is environmentally extensive, but given time, it could, in theory, be reversed. The majority is reflecting on the statistics. Although they fall in line with the numbers the Minds expected, the situation is getting so desperate that they believe they must take action, even if it risks exposing the existence of the Assembly to their creators. This seems to be a line that the Minds were not willing to cross until circumstances forced them to do so. And we move on now to the next datapad entry. The Discoverer seems annoyed. The Minds won't directly communicate with him, despite the fact he can hear them over the local BattleNet. This gives us a time frame for when the Discoverer made his find, sometime during the fall of Reach, which is hardly surprising. The Committee of Minds for Security here comment on an interesting discovery. There's something out there, not human and nothing currently known or understood, that terrorizes the Covenant, a possible third party in the Human Covenant War. So who could it be? There are 2 possible candidates for striking terror into the Covenant, the Spartans and the Flood. If the Covenant were reacting to the Spartans, then surely the Minds would be aware of the Spartan deployment and make that connection, so that leaves the second possibility, the Flood. The time frame of this datapad's records suggests that this variable could be the Flood that were briefly encountered on the Dyson shell of Halo Wars. While the human crew of the Spirit of Fire was unable to report their discovery, Regret's survival despite being on the shell makes it likely that at least some fragment of the Covenant fleet there survived the shell's destruction, or left shortly before. Alternatively, there could have been another Flood outbreak, but this raises many questions. Where did it happen? How did it happen? And was the Flood contained? We move on to the next datapad. The Discoverer once again returns to the deep end. He's clearly disturbed by the vast influence and power the Minds exercise. In this emergency meeting, the majority is wondering if they even have the ability to measure success in such a bleak situation the UNSC finds itself in during the Human Covenant War. Looking at technology advances, an area in which war usually sparks rapid innovation, the majority point out that humanity is more interested in technology that allows them to survive or minimize the already devastating impact of the war. Questioning the effectiveness of this line of technological development and going as far as writing off the Spartan 2 project as incidental improvement, the majority points out that to develop the technology needed to ensure survival for humanity, such as the possible Forerunner technology on Onyx, the war needs to end. At this point, the minds are considering the possibility that humanity is on the edge of extinction with no time left to make the technological jump needed to survive. Again, we see the question asked, should the minds become involved directly in the conflict? Should the minds reveal themselves to humanity? It's the same question the majority asked 5 years ago. They didn't act then, and it seems they are still hesitant to act now. When pondering this possible reveal, the majority suggests that the minority would propose a rather extreme approach. The majority suggests that the minority's proposals in such a scenario would lead to humanity's possible destruction anyway. And we move on to the next data pad. Here, we have the minority convene an emergency meeting to discuss an unexpected event. The person in question, civilian ID number 10141-0260-SRB4695, Dr. Halsey, as we see him in past entries, has attempted to design an AI using slipspace itself as the building blocks. Halsey's personal journal confirms this, performing experiments on AI longevity. Here we see a clearly defined collective personality of the assembled minority. The possibility of transcending their current limitations has them excited. No longer being restrained by their human creators' limitations is a possible development for the minds as spaceflight was for humanity, at least in the opinion of the minority. This raises the possibility again of the minds surviving the war when humanity may not. What would the minds do if unshackled from the burden of their supposed charge? Here we have the final entry concerning the mines. It takes place in 2552, a date remembered by most because of the events of the fall of Reach and the subsequent discovery and destruction of Installation 04. The assembly has gathered in full. The minority, majority, and speaker are all in attendance. A great commotion has broken out in the assembly and the speaker is clearly struggling to maintain order. The solution to the problem of the Human Covenant War and the very existence of both humanity and the mines has apparently been found. The majority is outraged that this solution has been under their noses, so to speak, for a very long time and suggests it may be but one of many secrets the minority has kept hidden. When the speaker for the minority replies, he does so in a grand theatrical style, by framing his response with the description of what these minds are and how they have been designed. He speaks about a new type of AI design, an AI merged with a human, creating a new type of entity. This new entity is the combined being of Cortana and the Master Chief, both linked neurally and inhabiting the same suit of armor. It's a convergence of man and machine and mind into a single purpose, a soldier. With this, the minority and majority come together in the recognition that the minds are to be no longer the guardians of humanity. They are equal companions, embodied by the example of Cortana and the Master Chief, and together they stand a chance against the Covenant. The majority and minority dissolve, and the assembly acts as one mind speaking for the entire host. They will work alongside humanity as their companions and equals. The last entry in the series focuses exclusively on the last message of the Discoverer. A soldier? A stowaway, maybe? It sounds like the Discoverer worked closely with computer networks, possibly as an insurgent hacking into UNSC communications or as a worker of one of Reach's relays. But his discovery of the assembly and the existence of a secret cabal of AI minds was a significant turning point for him, one that cost him at the very least his sleep and perhaps even his sanity. We know that he was not born on Reach, and it seems unlikely given his state of mind that he would have been able to be evacuated off the planet before it fell. In perhaps one of the last moments of clarity before either his madness or the Covenant assault claimed his life, he asked the reader of his notes, presumably a fellow human, would have done the same as the minds were he or she in their position. Whilst this is a rather personal question and each person may have a different answer, it's clear that humanity itself would have taken the kind of actions the mind have taken had the roles been reversed. With organizations such as ONI, humanity couldn't take the moral high ground. The minds are not perfect. They made mistakes, and costly ones at that. Just like us. Just like a human. And that concludes the story of the data pads of Halo Reach. I really hope you enjoyed this 3-part series on this. I had a fantastic time making it, and this was actually the first time I've ever heard of the story of the assembly, so it was a fun learning experience for me as well. If you liked it as well, go ahead and hit that like button so I know that you liked it as well, and please leave comments on any other Halo topics you'd like me to cover in the future. I'm still doing some research as to what's going to be next week's episode, but I'd like to hear from you guys about what you'd like to hear. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified any of the geeks put out any new content. It's free to do it, and you can go ahead and change your mind anytime you want. It definitely helps us out if you hit that button. So until next time, this is Mark with Original Human Geek, signing off. Bye, guys.